I still remember the smell of coffee that morning. It was a Saturday, mid-October, the kind of day when the air feels heavy but calm. I was 58 years old, a retired mechanic, living in a small town in Ohio. My wife, Linda, was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. We had been married for 27 years. That morning, I thought everything was fine. I thought I knew my life, my wife, my home. But sometimes, truth hides in the quietest moments. I had gone into the garage to look for my fishing rod. We had plans that weekend, or at least, I thought we did. While searching, I realized I'd left my phone inside. When I came back, Linda was on hers, whispering. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all make calls, right? But it wasn't the call, it was her tone, soft, nervous, almost tender. Like how she used to talk to me 20 years ago. When she saw me, she froze. Then she smiled, too quickly. Just Susan, she said. You remember Susan from yoga? I nodded. But something inside me stirred. Later that day, she said she was meeting Susan for lunch. I kissed her goodbye at the door. But when she drove away, something told me not to go fishing. Instead, I followed her. I hated myself for it, but I had to know. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I felt like a criminal, tailing my own wife. She didn't drive to the cafe where she usually met Susan. She went to a small motel off Route 43. I watched her park, step out, and look around. Then a man got out of another car. Tall, maybe her age, with silver hair and a leather jacket. They hugged. Not like friends, not even like old friends. It was the kind of hug you give when you've missed someone you shouldn't have. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe it was something else, anything else. But then she kissed him, right there, in the open daylight. And I felt something inside me break, quietly, like glass underfoot. I didn't confront her, not then. I just drove home, numb, like a man watching his own life fade in the rearview mirror. The house felt colder when I got back. Every photo on the wall looked like a lie. Her laughter, our vacations, the anniversary dinners, all of it replayed in my mind like a cruel film. When she came home, she smiled and asked, "Did you catch anything?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "No, nothing today." That night, I couldn't sleep. The sheets felt heavy, her breathing beside me, unbearable. Around 2 a.m., I got up and sat in the living room. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. I thought about everything we'd built, the years, the memories, the children grown and gone. And I wondered, when did it all start to fall apart? Was it my fault? Had I stopped noticing her? Had life turned us into polite strangers sharing a mortgage? The questions kept coming, sharper than knives. When the sun rose, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell or beg. I wanted the truth, not excuses. So at breakfast, I looked her in the eye and said, "Linda, who is he?" Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she sighed, the kind of sigh that ends a lifetime. She whispered, "You weren't supposed to find out." Those words hit me harder than the betrayal itself. I asked her how long. She said, "Almost a year. A year. 365 days of lies, laughter, and shared beds." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood up and walked out the door. Outside, the autumn wind cut through me like it knew my secret too. I drove nowhere, just miles and miles of empty road. I ended up by the lake, the place where I used to take my kids fishing when they were small. I sat there until evening, staring at the water, feeling like a ghost in my own life. I wanted to call someone, but who? My son lived 2 states away, my daughter had her own family, and my best friend, Mark, had passed away 3 years earlier. So I just sat there, alone with the truth. And for the first time in decades, I realized how lonely I'd been, even before she cheated. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. Because maybe she had been the only one who left, maybe I'd been gone too, for years. As the sun went down, I whispered to myself, "What now, Tom?" I didn't have an answer. That night, I didn't go home. I slept in my truck, parked by the lake. The seat was cold and stiff, but it felt more honest than our bed. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about every "I love you" we'd ever said. Did she mean it back then? Did I? Maybe love isn't something that lasts forever. Maybe it's something that changes, like seasons. I wondered if I could ever forgive her. Then I wondered if I even wanted to. The next morning, I went home. She was sitting on the porch, eyes swollen from crying. "Tom," she said softly. I didn't answer. She handed me a letter. "I didn't mean to hurt you," it began, but she did, she had. And part of me knew she'd been unhappy too, we both had. Still, that didn't make it right. For the next few days, we barely spoke. I walked around the house like a stranger. Every room had her scent, every corner had a memory. And I felt trapped between what was and what would never be again. On the fourth day, I packed a bag. She asked where I was going. "I don't know," I said, and that was the truth. I drove west, toward the mountains, with no destination. Just the open road, old songs on the radio, and a heart that didn't know how to beat anymore. Somewhere in Kentucky, I stopped at a small diner. An older waitress with kind eyes poured me coffee. She said, "You look like a man who's been through something." I smiled sadly. "You have no idea." She nodded, as if she did. I told her a bit, just that my wife had been unfaithful. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Honey, sometimes God breaks your heart to save your soul." I didn't believe her then, but her words stayed with me. I stayed in that diner for hours. The coffee went cold, but I didn't care. For the first time, someone had listened without judging me. Before I left, the waitress slipped me a napkin with a small note. It said, "Don't forget, broken things can still shine." Her name was Mary. I didn't know it then, but that sentence would follow me for the rest of my life. I drove on, no map, no plan. Each mile felt like shedding another layer of pain, but grief doesn't vanish that easily. It hides behind every song, every smell, every empty seat beside you. At night, I stayed in cheap motels. I ate at small diners, listening to strangers talk about their lives. It reminded me that everyone carries something. Heartbreak, regret, dreams that never came true. Somehow, that comforted me. One evening, I pulled over near an old roadside chapel. The doors were open, the lights dim. Inside, a man was sweeping the floor. He looked up and smiled. "You lost, son." I said, "Yeah, in more ways than one." He chuckled softly. "Aren't we all?" I sat there for a while, staring at the candles. I hadn't prayed in years, but I whispered something. Maybe not to God, maybe just to myself. "Help me understand why," I said. The air was still, but somehow lighter. When I left the chapel, the night didn't seem as dark. For the first time since everything happened, I felt like maybe there was a way forward. The next day, I called my daughter, Emily. She was surprised to hear from me. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked. I hesitated, then told her the truth. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Dad. You don't deserve that." Her words broke the dam. For the first time, I cried, not out of anger, but out of release. She told me to come visit her in Nashville, so I did. When I arrived, she hugged me like I was a lost child. Her home was small, but warm. She made me tea, sat me down, and said, "You've spent your life fixing cars, Dad. Maybe it's time to fix yourself." She was right. I'd spent years working, providing, surviving, but not living. That night, I slept on her couch, surrounded by family photos and quiet peace. I realized how much I'd missed by staying stuck in routine. The next morning, Emily showed me a photo of her kids. My grandkids. I hadn't seen them in almost 2 years. They were growing up fast. Something in me softened. Maybe life wasn't done with me yet. I stayed in Nashville for a week. We talked about everything: her childhood, my marriage, her mother. She said, "Mom made mistakes, but you did too. Dad, you stopped being her friend." Those words stung, but she was right. Marriage isn't just love, it's friendship. And ours had faded long before the betrayal. When I left Nashville, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just sad, but lighter. I decided to keep driving south, see where the road took me. Maybe somewhere along the way, I'd find myself again. Days turned into weeks. I saw sunsets over cornfields, fog rising over rivers, and old couples walking hand in hand. Each sight reminded me that life keeps moving, even when you don't. One night, in a small town in Alabama, my truck broke down. Old habit. I lifted the hood and started tinkering. Then a voice behind me said, "Need a hand, stranger?" I turned around. It was Mary, the same waitress from that diner in Kentucky. I couldn't believe it. She laughed, "Told you broken things can still shine." We went inside a nearby cafe, shared pie and stories. She was divorced, to grown kids, worked part-time, and painted in her free hours. She had the same kind of tired kindness I'd seen in her eyes before. We talked until midnight. No romance, no promises, just two people finding comfort in each other's company. Before I left, she said, "You should come by the diner tomorrow." We could use a mechanic, so I did. For the first time in months, I felt useful again. I fixed their old coffee machine, the delivery truck, even a broken jukebox. The staff started calling me Mr. Fix-It, and Mary brought me coffee every morning with a smile. I found myself looking forward to those moments. Her laughter filled the quiet corners of my day. One evening, we sat outside, watching the sky turn pink and gold. She said, "You know, I used to think love was only for the young." I smiled, "Me too." She looked at me for a long time and whispered, "Maybe we were wrong." Something in my chest stirred, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. But I wasn't ready yet. Love after betrayal feels like learning to walk again. You're scared you'll fall, but you want to try anyway. Still, it felt good to hope. The next weeks passed quietly. I rented a small room above the diner. Fixed things during the day, read in the evenings. Sometimes Mary joined me for dinner. We talked about everything, her childhood, my regrets, the strange beauty of second chances. She told me she used to dream of being a painter. Now she just painted small sunsets on wooden boards. One night she gave me one. She said, "It's not perfect, but it's honest." I smiled. That's all any of us can be. We started taking walks by the river. Sometimes we didn't even talk, just walked in silence. I didn't know if it was love yet, but it was peace. And peace was something I hadn't felt in years. Then, one evening, I got a call. It was Linda. Her voice was shaky. She said, "Tom, I heard you've been gone a long time." I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I felt the old ache rise in my chest, but it was softer now. "I forgive you," I said quietly. She began to cry. I told her I hoped she found what she was looking for. When I hung up, I felt something inside me finally let go. That night, I went outside and looked at the stars. I realized forgiveness wasn't for her, it was for me. And that forgiveness was the door I'd been waiting to open. The next morning, I saw Mary painting near the river. Sunlight caught her hair, and for the first time, I didn't see pain or regret, just life. I walked over, stood beside her, and said, "That's beautiful." She smiled without looking up. "So are second chances." I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the quiet magic of that moment. Maybe love doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes it begins softly, like the sound of a heart learning to beat again. I realized then, I wasn't the same man who discovered betrayal by a motel. That man was gone. In his place stood someone older, humbler, maybe even wiser. Life had broken me, but somehow, in the breaking, it had rebuilt me too. A few months passed, the days started to blend together, in a good way this time. I found a rhythm, fixed things, drink coffee, talk to Mary, breathe. It was simple, but it was real. Sometimes peace doesn't come as a grand moment, it comes quietly, like sunrise through the blinds. One morning, Mary asked if I'd like to come to her art show in town. I didn't even know she had one. She shrugged and said, "Just small paintings, nothing fancy." I went anyway. The gallery was small, filled with the smell of paint and fresh flowers. Her work hung along one wall, sunsets, rivers, open roads. One painting stopped me in my tracks. It showed a man sitting by a lake at dusk, staring at the water. The light in the painting looked like hope. I knew it was me. She noticed me staring and came up beside me. "Do you like it?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "You made me look peaceful," she smiled. "That's how I see you now." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached for my hand, hesitant, but sure, and I let her. It felt right. Not like starting over, but like continuing something that had quietly begun long ago. That night, we walked along the river again. The air was warm, filled with crickets and the faint hum of town lights. I told her I hadn't felt this calm in decades. She said, maybe you finally stopped running, and maybe I had. For years, I'd been chasing what I lost, my marriage, my identity, my sense of purpose. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to chase anything anymore. Life wasn't about what was taken, it was about what was left, and what you build with it. Mary and I started spending more time together. We'd go to the farmer's market on Sundays, fix things around town, and share dinner on her porch. Sometimes she painted while I read old novels aloud. There was a quiet comfort in those evenings, no drama, no pretending, just a soul's resting. One day, I told her about the day I found Linda at that motel. I told her everything, the shock, the anger, the silence afterward. She didn't interrupt or pity me, she just listened. When I finished, she said softly, pain changes us. But it doesn't have to define us. Her words settled deep inside me. I realized that for so long, I'd been defining myself by that one day, the day of betrayal. But that wasn't my story anymore, it was just a chapter. And that chapter had finally ended. One evening, as the sun set over the diner parking lot, I turned to Mary and said, "Do you ever regret the past?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but I'm grateful too. It made me who I am." I nodded. "Yeah, maybe the pain was the price for the peace." She smiled gently. "Then I'd say you paid in full." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. That night, we slow danced in her kitchen to an old Frank Sinatra song. I didn't remember the last time I'd danced. Her head rested on my shoulder, and I thought, so this is what healing feels like. Not fireworks, not revenge, just peace. And love, simple, honest, quiet love. As the months rolled on, I decided to stay in that little town. I fixed up an old workshop behind the diner. People came from all over with things to repair, clocks, radios, memories. They started calling the place Tom's Second Chance Shop. I liked the sound of that. Because that's exactly what it was, my second chance. Mary painted a sign for the door. "We fix what's broken." Sometimes even hearts. We laughed about it, but deep down, it was true. Every day felt like a small redemption. I even started writing again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Little notes, reflections, stories about people I met. One of those stories was about a man who lost everything but found himself again. And I realized I was writing about me. Sometimes life doesn't take you where you planned, but where you need to go. If you told me a year ago that I'd find peace in a diner in Alabama, I would have laughed. But here I was, alive, grateful, and finally free. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, I sat with Mary on her porch. We watched the light spill across the fields. I said, "Funny how life works out." She smiled. "You think it's funny?" I grinned. "Maybe not funny, just beautiful." She reached for my hand, and we sat there in silence. No need for words anymore. The world felt still, like everything was exactly where it should be. I realized then, love isn't something you find. It's something you grow, even after winter. I wasn't the man who'd been betrayed anymore. I was a man who'd learned to forgive, to rebuild, to live again. And in that quiet morning light, I finally thanked life for not ending when I thought it had. Because sometimes, the end is just the beginning we needed all along. That was my second life, and it was worth every broken piece that led me here. A year later, I visited my daughter again. She took one look at me and said, "Dad, you look different." I smiled. "I feel different." She asked about Mary, and I told her everything. Emily hugged me and said, "I'm glad you found someone who sees you." That word, "he sees," stayed with me. Because that's what Mary did. She saw me. Not who I was, but who I could be. That night, we had dinner with my grandkids. Their laughter filled the room, and I felt something warm rise in my chest, belonging. Later, I told Emily, "You were right. I needed to fix myself first." She smiled. "Guess you finally did, hun," I laughed. With a little help, when I drove back to Alabama, I felt a deep calm inside me. Like all the loose ends had finally tied themselves together. Life was still imperfect, my past didn't vanish. But I no longer wished it away, because every pain, every heartbreak, had shaped the man sitting behind that steering wheel. When I got home, Mary was waiting on the porch. She had 2 mugs of coffee ready. She smiled and said, "Took you long enough." I sat beside her, the warm cup in my hands, and whispered, "I'm home." For the first time, I truly meant it, not just home to a place, but to myself. As the sun dipped low, I thought about everything I'd lost and gained. And I realized, in some strange way, I was grateful for it all. Because without the breaking, I'd never have learned what it means to be whole. Sometimes life tears you apart, not to punish you, but to rebuild you stronger. And love, the real kind, doesn't erase your scars, it just makes you proud to have them. If I could go back to that day in the garage, the day everything changed, I wouldn't stop it. Because that pain led me here, to peace, to forgiveness, to love that asks for nothing but truth, and that, I think, is the best kind of love there is. So if you ever find yourself broken, sitting alone, wondering why, remember this: broken things can still shine. I know, because I did. And every sunrise reminds me, the story isn't over yet. It's been 5 years since that day by the lake. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Other times, I still wake up remembering the sound of that motel door closing. But it doesn't hurt anymore, not like before. Now, it feels like an old scar that reminds me how far I've come. Mary and I built a quiet life together. We still live above the diner, though it's ours now. The sign still says Tom's Second Chance Shop, but we added something new underneath, and Mary's coffee. Every morning, she paints while I fix things. Sometimes travelers stop by, share their stories, cry a little, laugh a little. I like listening to them. Everyone's story sounds different, but the pain always rhymes. And so does the hope. People tell me they envy my calm. I tell them it didn't come cheap. Peace has a price. It's everything you thought you couldn't live without. But once you let it go, you realize you never needed it as much as you needed yourself. I used to think the worst day of my life was the day I discovered the betrayal. Now I know it was the day I woke up to the truth. The truth that love can fade, and yet life can bloom again. That losing someone doesn't mean losing yourself. And that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Mary and I sit by the river. The same river where we first talked about second chances. She always brings her sketchbook. I bring my silence. And together, we make peace out of the past. She once told me, "You know, Tom, you're a different man now." I smiled and said, "No, I'm just finally the man I was meant to be." That's the funny thing about heartbreak. It strips you down until there is nothing left but truth. And that's where healing begins. A while ago, I got a letter from Linda. She said she'd remarried, that she was happy, and that she hoped I was too. I read it sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Then I smiled, folded it neatly, and tucked it in a box labeled Old Life, because that's what it was: old. Gone, but respected, part of my story, but not the whole book. I didn't reply. Some goodbyes don't need words. Instead, I walked outside and watched Mary painting the evening sky. The colors, gold, orange, violet, looked like forgiveness, and I realized I didn't lose love. I just found it where I least expected it, in kindness, in quiet mornings, in starting over. If you'd told me years ago that I'd thank the woman who broke my heart, I would have laughed. But now, I do, because her betrayal pushed me into becoming the man I should have been all along. A man who listens, who feels, who forgives, who loves, not because he needs to, but because he chooses to. That's the difference between the first life and the second one. In my first life, I wanted control. In my second, I learned to surrender. To trust the process, even when it hurt. To believe that everything, even the heartbreak, serves a purpose. And maybe that purpose was this: to remind someone out there, maybe even you, that it's never too late to start again. I know what it's like to wake up with nothing but pain. To stare at an empty side of the bed and wonder who you are now. But I promise you, that emptiness isn't the end. It's the clearing before the new beginning. The silence before the song, the space where your next chapter grows. So don't give up, don't let the hurt make you hard. Let it make you honest, because someday, you'll wake up and realize you've made peace with your past. And you'll smile, not because it didn't happen, but because you survived it. I think about that often when I see the sunrise. The sky turns from black to gold, just like hearts do when they're ready to forgive. And I whisper to myself, "You made it, old man," because I did. I made it through the storm, through the silence, through myself. And I came out whole, not the same, better. That's the gift of life. It keeps offering you new chances, as long as you have the courage to take them. So if you're listening to this, wondering if your story is over, it's not. Not by a long shot. The pain will fade, the memories will soften. And one day, you'll laugh again, maybe even love again. Just like I did, broken things can still shine. And so can you. That's the truth I've learned. The truth I want to leave behind. Now, every night before I sleep, I thank the woman who betrayed me. Not for the pain, but for the push, because without it, I'd still be half alive in a life that wasn't mine. And this peace, this love, this quiet joy is worth every tear it took to get here. So here's to second chances, here's to healing. And here's to the beautiful truth that life begins again, even after heartbreak. Good night, and thank you for listening to my story. If it helps even one person believe again, then it was worth telling. After I finish talking, I step outside one last time. The stars are out, bright and endless. Mary's painting light glows through the window. I can hear her humming an old tune. The same kind she used to play on the jukebox when we first met. The night air feels cool against my skin. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, and smile. Because for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I belong. Not chasing the past, not fearing the future. Just here, alive, loved, at peace, and as the wind moves through the trees, I swear I hear a whisper, soft, familiar, forgiving. You're home now, and I am, truly, finally, home. It's been 10 years now, 10 years since that October morning that changed everything. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if none of it had happened. But then I look around, at the soft light, the quiet home, the woman painting by the window, and I realize I wouldn't trade this for anything. Time has a way of turning pain into wisdom. You don't see it while it's happening. You only notice when you stop hurting. Mary and I are both older now. Her hair's gone mostly silver, so has mine. We laugh about it, call each other two ghosts who refuse to leave, but truth is, we've never felt more alive. The diner still opens at 7 a.m. every day. Locals come in, travelers stop by, and our old jukebox still plays Sinatra when it feels like it. Sometimes, I see young couples holding hands in the corner booth. They remind me of who we once were, all hopeful, naive, a little scared. And I smile, because I know what they don't yet. Love isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to rebuild, together or alone. Mary says I'm a philosopher now. I tell her I am just a man who has made enough mistakes to finally understand something. Every morning, I write in my notebook, little thoughts, pieces of memory, lessons I want to leave behind. I call it the Second Life Journal. Maybe one day Emily or my grandkids will read it. Maybe they'll learn something sooner than I did. Sometimes, people who visit the diner recognize me from the local newspaper story. They ask, "How did you forgive her? How did you move on?" I always tell them the same thing: you don't move on. You move forward, the past stays where it is. But your heart learns to walk beside it instead of dragging it. Mary loves when I say that. She says it sounds like something worth framing. Maybe she painted one day. In the evenings, we sit on the porch with coffee and watch the world quiet down. Birds in the trees. The sound of kids playing in the distance. The same sun that once sat on my pain now sets on my peace. And that, to me, is proof that life always comes full circle. Sometimes, when I close the shop at night, I run my hand across the counter. I remember all the broken things that have passed through here. Toasters, radios, clocks, each one with a story. Each one given a second chance, just like me. It's funny, really. Fixing things taught me how to fix myself, slowly, gently, with patience. You don't throw something away because it's cracked. You take your time, you mend it. And it becomes stronger where it broke. That's what love does too. One evening, Mary said, "Do you ever wish we'd met sooner?" I thought about it and said, "No, I think we met exactly when we were ready." She smiled and said, "Yeah, maybe love waits until you can finally understand it." That night, we danced again, slower, softer than before. Our steps weren't perfect, but our rhythm was ours. Outside, the world kept spinning, but inside, time stood still. Sometimes I think about Linda, not with anger, with compassion. I hope she's at peace. Maybe she found her second chance too. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life gives everyone another sunrise. We just have to open our eyes to see it. A few months ago, Emily brought her kids to visit. They're taller now. One's learning to drive. I let him take my old truck for a spin down the dirt road. He stalled it twice, laughed, and said, "Guess I'm not a natural." I told him, that's how learning works. You mess up, then you try again. And I realized I wasn't just talking about driving. That's how life works too. Fall, stand, repeat. Until one day, standing doesn't hurt anymore. Mary watched us from the porch, smiling. Her eyes had that same light, the one she paints in every sunset. When the kids left, the house felt full again. I told her, "You know, I never thought I'd live long enough to see this peace," she said. "Peace doesn't come to those who wait, Tom. It comes to those who forgive." I looked at her and thought, she's right, as always. Now, some mornings, I wake up before dawn. I sit outside with my coffee, watching the light grow. The world feels fragile, but beautiful, just like the people in it. Sometimes I write letters I never send. To the man I used to be, to the woman who broke me, to the life I left behind, and I end them all the same way: thank you. You made me who I am. There's power in gratitude. It turns what hurt you into what healed you. And that, my friends, is the greatest repair job of all. Now and then, I get asked to speak at the community center. They call it Tom's Talk on Forgiveness. I tell my story, the betrayal, the loss, the rebuilding. People cry. Sometimes they laugh. But by the end, they always smile. Because they see themselves in my story. We all break in different ways, but we all have the same chance to start again. One night, after a talk, a woman about my age came up to me. She said, "Do you ever wish it never happened?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "Because without that pain, I'd still be the man who never knew peace." She nodded, tears in her eyes. And I realized, maybe that's why I went through it. So someone else could believe healing was possible too. Now, as I write this last part of my story, I feel the years behind me. The mistakes, the lessons, the grace. My hands are older, slower, but steady. My heart, though, feels lighter than ever. Because I finally understand, love was never about forever. It was about being fully here, now, with the people who choose to stay. Mary calls from the kitchen, asking if I want pie. I laugh and say, "Only if it's apple." She laughs too, the same laugh that saved me once. I close my notebook and look around. The shop, the light, the life we built, all of it born from the ashes of what I thought was the end. And maybe that's what endings really are. Not death, but transformation. Not goodbye, but thank you. Because every story worth living has both heartbreak and hope. And in the end, the hope always wins. I take a deep breath, step outside one more time, and let the night air fill my lungs. Stars above, earth below, love beside me. And I whisper, softly, to whoever's listening, it's never too late. Then I turn off the lights, close the shop door, and walk back inside. Mary's waiting with 2 slices of pie and that same smile. And that's enough, more than enough. Because this is what happiness really looks like. Not perfect, not endless. Just honest and real, my second life, my best life. And I wouldn't change a thing. The older I get, the more I understand silence. It's not empty, it's full of answers. Some mornings, I sit by the window with a blanket and coffee, watching the fog roll over the hills. Mary's brush moves softly over her canvas, capturing the light that slips between the trees. We don't talk much during those moments, we don't need to. Love, at this age, isn't loud anymore. It's quiet, steady, and endlessly kind. The kind of love that holds your hand, even when words fail. Sometimes, I write letters to my grandchildren. They're too young now to understand them, but one day, they will. I tell them stories about their grandmother's laughter. About the diner that once smelled of coffee and cinnamon every morning. About the little repair shop that saved an old man's soul. I tell them how forgiveness rebuilt everything I thought I'd lost. How the heart, when cracked, lets more light in. And how pain, if faced with grace, becomes a teacher instead of a curse. There was a time I feared growing old alone. Now I know that solitude isn't loneliness, it's peace, if you've made friends with your past. Mary sometimes teases me, says I've turned into a preacher. Maybe I have, but not the kind who speaks from a pulpit, the kind who preaches through scars and laughter. The kind who's seen the worst and still believes in the best. Last week, Emily brought me an old photo album. Inside were pictures of the house, the diner, and even one of me and Linda from the early years. For a moment, I felt that old ache again. But then I smiled, because I finally understood. She wasn't my ending, she was my beginning. Without her, I wouldn't have learned how deep love can cut, or how strong a person can become afterward. Sometimes, life has to break you, so you can see what you're made of. And I was made of more than I ever knew. I used to think my story was about betrayal. But now I see it was always about grace. Grace that came through heartbreak, loss, and second chances. If you asked me what the secret to peace is, I'd say, stop fighting the past. It already happened. What matters is who you become because of it. Every scar is proof you survived. Every wrinkle is a memory of laughter or tears, both worth having. Now, at 73, my body slows down, but my heart feels faster than ever. Not in the restless way of youth, but in gratitude. Grateful for mornings, grateful for the smell of rain. Grateful that I lived long enough to love again. Mary and I take evening walks down the old road by the lake. Sometimes we don't say a word for 20 minutes. And that silence, it feels sacred, the kind of quiet that says, we made it. Every now and then, we pass a young couple arguing in their car. I smile and whisper, they'll learn, because love isn't about being right, it's about staying. About choosing kindness when anger feels easier. Mary squeezes my hand every time I say that. And in her touch, I feel everything I ever needed to know. A few nights ago, I couldn't sleep. I got up, went to my desk, and started writing a letter. It wasn't for anyone in particular, maybe for whoever finds it after I'm gone. It began like this: if you're reading this, I want you to know, you're going to be okay. I wrote about the night I found out about Linda's affair. About the rage, the heartbreak, the months of emptiness. And then I wrote about the morning I met Mary, about her laugh, the way she handed me coffee without asking what I wanted. How, somehow, she gave me back the world I thought I'd lost. By the time I finished writing, the sun was rising. The paper was full of smudges, not from ink, but from tears. Tears of release, not regret. I sealed the letter and placed it in my notebook. Someday, someone will read it and see that even the darkest night ends with dawn. Life's funny that way. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It just keeps giving you chances to begin again. The trick is learning to say yes to healing, yes to forgiveness, yes to love, even when it scares you, especially when it scares you. Mary says the hardest part of growing old is realizing how fast time goes. I tell her that's the gift. You finally see how precious every moment really is. We don't chase tomorrow anymore, we savor today. The way the sunlight hits the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge. The small, ordinary miracles that once went unnoticed. Because in the end, that's what happiness is made of. Not grand moments, but quiet ones. Sometimes, people still come by the shop. I don't fix much anymore, but I listen. And sometimes, that's all a broken heart really needs, someone to listen. The world's changed a lot since the day I found that letter on the table. Phones got smarter, people got busier, but love stayed the same. It's still the one thing that makes life worth every bruise. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain. It means letting go, not because they deserve it, but because you do. If you hold on too tightly to the past, your hands aren't free to catch the future. So let go and live. Mary just called me to dinner. She made that apple pie again. I smile, close my journal, and whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. For all of it, the heartbreak, the healing, the years in between. Because every bit of it led me here, and here is beautiful. So if anyone ever asks me how to survive betrayal, I'll tell them this: don't just survive. Grow. Grow through it, around it, beyond it. One day, you'll look back and realize the pain didn't end your life, it shaped it. And when that day comes, you'll finally be free. Free to love again, free to live again, free to be whole.